guys, you're in the group of where we're practicing the last 6 problems, being able to identify valid arguments symbolically. I want to make sure that you remember the 4 forms of the arguments first, and then we're going to go ahead and I'm actually going to do the problems from the quiz so you see how I think through these and how I do these. And then I'm actually going to give you some practice problems to do on the back. So what I'll do is it'll be a 2-part video. The first part will be the first page, and then the second part it will be me working through the problems with the answers, and as a result it will give you a way to have a practice on these, I guess, so you have a little more time to figure it out. So make sure you're listening carefully on this and do it in the process that I said, and it should go well. All right, so first thing, we got to remember our different laws. Well, the first law is law of detachment, and this law uses 1 conditional statement and 1 proposition. Now, with this law, it says the following: if P then Q, P therefore Q. What does that say? It says if I accept this conditional statement is true, and if I tell you the hypothesis is true, therefore you can logically conclude the conclusion. The repeat here, the big thing here is that you need to remember that I use the exact same hypothesis. I do not change it. And then we have modus tollens. And it's if P, then Q. If not Q, therefore not P. What says if I accept that a conditional statement is true, but I show you that I negated the conclusion, therefore that means my hypothesis had to be negated. Now, another form of this would be like the following. If P, then not Q, make sure I can get the not symbol there, and then I have Q, therefore not P is still valid. Why? Because I'm negating the conclusion. Hear me say this, I'm negating the conclusion. All right, so that's modus tollens. Then I have law of syllogisms, or law of silly gizzards, as I like to call it. This is the only one that combines 2 conditional statements. So I have if P, then Q, and then I have if Q, then R, therefore if P, then R. Now, for some of you, you think of this like the transitive property. It's the connector. But the key with this one is you've got to make sure that you have a conclusion and a hypothesis that are exactly the same. Notice then, it's like they kind of simplify out. They're gone. And I get if P, then R. It's kind of a way of remembering that. And then we have the law of contrapositives. This is the only one that you can use a single conditional statement for. It says, hey, if I assume this conditional is true, I can naturally assume that its contrapositive is true as well. It's kind of one of those really cool ones. Now, remember on your homework that I asked you to identify these arguments, if they were valid or not valid. Well, this one, these were not that bad, maybe if you want to think about that one, but you have to know how to identify them. So on the very first one here on the directions, I look at it and say that if P, then Q, if Q. The moment I see a conditional statement and a proposition, I have 2 choices. That's going to be LD, MT, or it's not valid. So I look at this one, I'm like, okay, I have the conditional. Oh, I'm talking about the conclusion for my next statement. Oh, wait. In order to be a conclusion for my next statement, it has to be modus tollens and it has to be negated. It's not negated. Therefore, modus tollens is out. But I turn around and I go, all right, can it be law of detachment? Well, law of detachment says I have to repeat the hypothesis. I'm not repeating the hypothesis. So therefore, it's neither one of those. So it's no valid conclusion. Now I'm looking at the next one. I got a singleton here, a single conditional statement. The only choice is law of contrapositive. Did I flip and did I negate? And sure enough, I did. So that's law of contrapositive. Now I'm looking at the next one and I'm given only 2 conditional statements. Well, if you're given only 2 conditional statements, the only choice you have is LS. So I look at it and say, all right, do I have a hypothesis and a conclusion that repeats? And the answer is yes, I do. Well, when you do that, that means they simplify out. It's like that's your connector, your glue. Notice the P stays here in the hypothesis, the T stays there in the conclusion, but it is LS. That one does work. Why? Because of the repetition here. Then I look at 22 and I see this one fancy one. So if M, then parenthesis. That parenthesis means that whole parenthesis is my conclusion. Okay, so the whole thing is the conclusion. But I look at this. What did I do to that conclusion? I negated it. So therefore, I can negate my hypothesis. So for me, that I know is modus tollens. It strictly follows the rule. And then on 23, look at this one. I have if R, then not M, R. Now, here's the thing. If I have a conditional and a proposition, that means it's either going to be law of detachment or it's going to be modus tollens. Well, I repeated the hypothesis. Well, which one has a repeated hypothesis? Law of detachment. So therefore, M. So that's LD. Now, on this next one, it looks like, and I actually put a gap here. It looks like I'd have multiple reasons on this. Now, here's the thing. I look at it, I'm like, all right, is there any way I can combine these? And I look at this first two, and it looks kind of like modus tollens, but what's the problem? I have no negation there. Well, guess what? If I can't negate that, I can't even validly put those two together. So I even skip around, like maybe I can put those together. No, I can't. I can't put those together. There is no valid conclusion because this very first one is not LD or MT. I can't even worry about the second part. I have no way of getting there. So that one was no valid conclusion. Now, I want you to stop and try the back. Okay? After you stop and try the back, watch the second video to get the answers. And then hopefully you do a little bit better. All right, go ahead and shut it off. Try for the next 2 or 3 minutes to see if you can figure it out, and then watch the next video to see if you got it right.